for 2023. Ladies and gentlemen, as you are aware, for 2023, a number of countries, ladies and gentlemen, as you are aware, in order to prevent the spread, 2023, a number of countries, ladies and gentlemen, as you are aware, in order to prevent the spread, so many number of countries, ladies and gentlemen, so many businesses have closed. As you are aware, in order to prevent the spread, so many, especially ladies and gentlemen, so many businesses have closed. As you are aware, in order to prevent this, of course, is going to be especially ladies and gentlemen, so many businesses have closed. As you are aware, in order to prevent this, of course, is going to be especially anger, so many businesses have vulnerable segments of society. This, of course, is going to be especially anger. Vulnerable segments of serious issues, and we hope that those countries will come up with serious issue that may and we hope that has to be planned. Serious issue that we don't know down. Otherwise, we see analytics are already indicating that there are so many Africans serious that we don't know down the otherwise, we see analytics are already indicating that. Ladies and gentlemen, the other issue that I want to talk about is that in Africa, otherwise, we see analytics are already indicating that. Ladies and gentlemen, the other issue that I want to talk about face very high risk in Africa. Otherwise, we see analytics are already high population. The other issue was something about face very high. Many of the Africans don't even have running water. Very high. Here we are talking about something washing your face. Many of the Africans don't even have running water. Here we are regularly asking about something washing your face. This is really a challenge to discuss how we can address these challenges. Also talks about education for all, school, and in many of the African states, they are conducting free education for all. But with the coming of this pandemic, schools have closed, and remote learning is very less effective and not accessible for some. You can see that teaching people on the internet is a challenge because of the poor network on our continent. There is therefore need to use ICT effectively to develop, acquire, and produce sciences. I also want to talk about the fact that COVID-19 has stretched Africa's health, do the signs, the gains, that have been realized in the health sector in Africa. You recall that African countries are required to sign the Abuja Declaration, committing themselves to allocate at least 15% of their budget to the health sector. And if we can do this, then that means that we can be able to fight this COVID. If we can allocate the 15% as is articulated in the Abuja Declaration, then we'll have better fighting methods for this COVID-19. The outbreak of COVID will also worsen Africa's problem of food insecurity and malnutrition. We know very well that Africa has turned into a net importer of food currently, importing nearly a quarter of her food needs. This position, we are worried, is most likely to worsen. The other sector that has been hit very hard, ladies and gentlemen, is the tourism sector or the tourism industry, which has been a major source of revenue for many African countries. And with the closure of the airspace and with many of our tourists coming from outside of the continent, this has greatly and will greatly be affected, leaving so many people who have been employed in this sector vulnerable. We are aware that the pandemic has stretched Africa's preparedness for natural disasters, in addition with the tourism industry struggling. for the protection and management of national parks on the basis of the master and national plans, and this is greatly going to be hampered. Ladies and gentlemen, with countries struggling to mobilize resources to fight the outbreak of COVID-19, it will be a challenge to meet Agenda 2063 targets of readiness for implementation of the Trans-Africa Highway Missing Link and readiness for in countries to connect to African high-speed rail. One of the flagship projects of a high-speed train network that is supposed to connect African capitals so that it becomes easier for someone to travel. It becomes easier for someone to travel from Cape Town to Cairo, or for someone to travel from Dakar to Djibouti using a train. But all this requires resources to be mobilized. But here we are, again, faced with the challenge of COVID. And therefore, all the resources that would be used to come up with some of these infrastructures will definitely go to the fight against COVID. And this definitely will harm the implementation of Agenda 2063. With people out of without food and increased violence, from all forms of are likely not going to be met. As countries struggle to mobilize resources to stop the spread of COVID-19, it will be hard for them to fully comply to the funding of Africa's peace and security institutions. And these are very vital. Where there is no peace, of course, there is no development. And the African Union has always been getting money from its member states to fund these peace missions. But it will be a challenge to tell member states to contribute when they are already facing this problem of COVID-19. In addition, ladies and gentlemen, we know that Africa's revenues have also grown, especially the monies that we have been getting from people in the diaspora. And quite a number of countries have gotten a lot of money from their people in the diaspora. Uganda has been getting a lot of money from the diaspora, Nigeria, and all these countries. But at the moment, these people are affected with the COVID-19. And it is really very, 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 very hard for them to continue sending this money when they are not working or when, of course, there is a lot that we can talk about here, but due to limited time, that our survival on this planet depends on how much we keep investing in science, technology, and innovation. It's therefore important that African leaders should support all these efforts, especially around scientific research and development, and reevaluate what threats deserve more of our individual and collective action.
We seem to have lost you, Charles. Charles, are you there? It looks like we have lost Charles completely. I don't see him on the screen. In order to save time, I would say that we move on. And we will towards the end. Charles, are you back? Sorry, I can see your mouth moving, but I can't hear you. Okay. Yeah, Charles, try again. We can't hear you. Lynn, can the rest of you hear him?
Charles, please select English language under interpretation. Select English language under interpretation, please.
Yes, I'm there. Sorry about that. I was saying that
please try to wrap up also. Yes, just go ahead.
I was saying that African leaders should support all these efforts, especially around scientific research and development, and reevaluate what threats deserve more of our individual and collective action. In conclusion, the COVID-19 storm will pass, but the choices we make today will change our lives for decades to come. Let us not waste this opportunity to reflect and do development differently. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you also for striving to keep it briefer than we had previously promised you. I can't see everything. I saw at least one question that came directly, and I'll just repeat it to you now, but I think you can get a chance to answer it in the end after we listen to the other panelists. And one of our fellow comrades asked, how do we maintain momentum on the African continental free trade area, despite the twin challenges, the challenges of, on the one hand, COVID-19, and on the other hand, the challenge to multilateralism globally. The rise of ultra-nationalism and thumbing our noses at multilateralism. So that's a pending question for you, and we'll get back to it in the end. I would now like to invite our second presenter. And our second presenter is the Honorable Chief Fortune Charumbira. The Honorable Chief was elected unopposed as the fourth Vice President of PAP, the Pan-African Parliament, in October 2018, representing the Southern African region in the Bureau. He oversees the portfolios of the plenary, languages, committees, media, and communications. In May 2016, he was elected the chairperson of the PAP Permanent Committee on Audit and Public Accounts, a very powerful and very important committee. And before that, he had served as the chair of the Committee on Administrative and Financial Evaluation. The Honorable Chief is a traditional leader in his home country of Zimbabwe, and is the current president of the Chiefs Council, which is an important institution in their country. He was inaugurated as substantive chief on 24th May 2000. And in 2013, he was retained as president of the Chiefs Council in elections that were conducted by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission in Harare. He previously served as deputy minister in the Ministry of Local Government and Public Works. He holds a master's degree in business administration, as well as a bachelor's degree in administrative law and labor law, and is a specialist on institutional change and performance management. Honorable Chief Charumbira will address us on the role of parliaments in the fight against COVID-19. Just like with Mr. Wangadia, he will have a maximum of 20 minutes. But again, I suggest, Honorable Chief, that you take less time. That may allow an interlude where you can answer one or two direct questions before we go to the other panelists, even though, as I said, there'll be sufficient time for general plenary at the end. So welcome, Honorable Chief Charumbira.
Thank you, Mr. Dare. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly, Chief. We can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you. And my wife is also say it's good morning. And I believe it's good morning in all the countries that the participants are operating from. May I also say, I do appreciate the participation and opening remarks by the Honorable Acting President of PAP, Honorable Boras. May I also say welcome and thank all the PAP, Pan-African Parliament, members of Parliament on this who are participating, including staff, civil society, other participants, and the rest of us on this program. I've been asked to speak on the role of Parliament, or what is called parliamentary responses to the pandemic, that is COVID-19, and specifically how the COVID-19 pandemic is changing the way parliaments work, and how Parliament is helping implement the emergency health measures being recommended by the World Health Organization. First of all, I would want to say Parliament is an institution, as we all know. Its many roles include ensuring that the views of the citizens are taken on board when decisions are made. So in this COVID-19 pandemic, Parliament is expected to ensure that whatever governments are doing, the people's views are also included. The other role will be for Parliament is to ensure that appropriate laws are put in place to ensure that we control or eliminate COVID-19. And then oversight, the policies that are coming out, that the responses that various governments are making to ensure that we control, eliminate COVID-19. Before I go to specific initiatives that are emerging from various countries, Africa and outside Africa, I want to say it is imperative, it's very critical that parliaments play their part because, of course, the magnitude of the problem itself. There have been areas of differences in terms of approach and views. Although the World Health Organization has done very well, it has given us the necessary protocols which universally are being acceptable. Stay at home, wear face masks, social distancing. I think those now are sacrosanct and we are all following those. But in addition, we do have some areas where Parliament's role even becomes more critical. Areas where there's no uniformity in the way various countries are handling those issues. And the most notorious one at the moment is the issue of where should the vaccines come from. As you have heard, the president of Niger and the others, several others have heard of president of Rwanda expressing some radical views defending the African position. We've heard of the Madagascar solution to COVID-19, which naturally the Western world would want to dispute and say because it doesn't come from Africa. We've heard of the other approaches like Tanzania approach. Those issues have created divergent acceptance. Then there's the other issues of things like the lockdowns. The lockdowns, the issues of funds, the issues of education. The previous president mentioned tourism, the education, schools, when should they open or not open. So the education sector, again, there's a lot of debate. So there's been a lot of debate as to how things should be done, even within a country like lockdowns. Is it economy? Is it health? Whether industry? Parliament now should also be seen to be representing the views of the citizens. And in response to that, I'll start with countries outside our continent and then come back to our continent. We've seen countries now going back to amend their rules. One rude awakening for parliaments with the advent of COVID-19 is that parliaments have operated on rules that were mainly not cognizant of changes in technology, other enablers, technological enablers, so that in the way we do business, Parliament is lagged behind in ensuring that it takes advantage of advances in technology. Most of our procedures in the Parliament, the rules of Parliament, standing rules, they've assumed that members of Parliament will be in one room, either as a committee or in a plenary, and they'll vote in one room and speak in one room. COVID-19 has moved us to change from that position. So we see now, for example, Belgium now, which has amended its rules to say a member of parliament can be present in a selected committee or in plenary meetings where they are not physically in the chamber, to enable parliament to respond to COVID-19, to make certain rules very quickly, to make certain pronouncements and express the views of the citizens. We have to amend a lot of our procedures in our parliaments. Brazil has done the same. That's from outside Africa. And several other countries, I don't need to go country by country. There's been this response of ensuring that we work from home, even as parliamentarians. We meet in committee, even in the plenary, from homes. But that has entailed amendment of rules, and a number of countries have already moved in that direction. And in Africa, for example, you have Angola. They've also amended their rules, which now include video conferencing. And that even within the parliament, because the spaces in each chamber, most of our chambers do not allow for social distancing, the numbers of MPs in a particular chamber. So we've seen countries like Angola even allowing MPs to be in different rooms within the same building. So some will be in the parliament building in different rooms, some will be in the chamber, some will be at their homes, but participating in the same meeting. And we've got examples, I selected examples. Cape Verde has done the same also. But what is done in their case, they reduced the number of MPs to ensure social distance. MPs meeting, not in the constitution, but meeting to pass certain laws in order, and mainly for most parliaments, COVID has created a situation where our budget allocations for the current financial years are insufficient for the health sector. So Parliament has had to reconvene, sometimes with lesser numbers, to ensure that we reappropriate budgetary allocations and ensure that the health sector has more money to support the COVID-19 initiatives. The Democratic Republic of Congo, also the 15th of May this year, met, but again also they reduced their numbers. The House of Assembly consists of 500 MPs, but this was reduced to 64. And then the upper house, instead of 109, only 30 were allowed. But again, this is just a temporary measure because those that you leave out also represent citizens. So what is more important is to create a situation whereby every MP attends. Djibouti has also made similar initiatives on the 29th of April. But again, also they set up an ad hoc support committee, which with 26% being female, to take care of urgent issues. But these are simply crisis measures. Our parliament does not exclude other MPs. But of course, these initiatives would then enable to open up other resources and ensure that everyone then can participate. Of interest is the East African Legislative Assembly, EALA. As you're all aware, the East African community is a parliament of that comprises Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, South Sudan, and Tanzania. These have also come up and have met using what they call Cisco video conferencing system. And the first plenary was held on the 7th of May to discuss possibilities of regional approaches to the pandemic, which again is a very important issue. But as a regional parliament, IALA is debating regional approaches. Regional approaches become important also so that we don't have a haphazard approaches from one country to another in the same region. For example, one country may open its borders when the other is still closed. In that way, the opening is not effective. So you open on your side, but you can't cross into that country. So regional initiatives sometimes should be harmonized, and the parliament becomes very important. We see also Egypt on the 4th of May this year, as 2020, also putting in place some measures. First of all, ensuring that the members of parliament themselves are safe and staff, and then sterilizing the buildings, and then allowed members to pass important laws in order to reappropriate state budget. And also the issue of postponing the payment of taxes in the sectors affected by the pandemic. This was done by parliament. In terms of the law, issues have to go through parliament. So you want to end where the government and then parliament countries are now coming up with a lot of measures to ensure that we don't have two forms of crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic is a crisis, and the inability of parliament also to meet, to pass laws, another crisis. So parliaments are now responding to that. I can say Morocco has done the same, just sampling. I know almost every country on the continent has done that. Sierra Leone, Tunisia, but the key issues in the parliamentary responses. The first one is the issue of the parliaments now are moving very fast, amending the rules to enable that attendance of a parliamentary meeting does not mean being physically in a particular room altogether. Parliamentarians also, as part of their representative role, have to go out and meet citizens, but there are also risks. They also contract the coronavirus, so they are now also calling for protective clothing for parliamentarians to be able to move around. Then the whole issue which I've mentioned again, that we have African parliament needs also and engage regional parliaments on the continent, and then come up with continental response. Continental response is also important again when neighboring countries come up at different stages in different policies. It may not promote
Honorable Chief, your line seems to have
interaction in trade wants to see develop. The EU does not have a continental response. In the future, I think so.
No, just two.
At what point did I lose you?
Just 2 seconds.
Sorry. Which point was I on? So I know where I was lost. At which point had I been presented? What was my last word on your side, so that I can go back?
I think you're still talking about the parliamentary measures, but as I said, I think you went off for just about 3 seconds.
Did the issue of protective clothing for MPs come out?
No, I'm not sure you had made that. Maybe you start there. I don't think I made the point about protective.
When I said successes and gaps in parliamentary responses, did that come out?
Yes, that came out.
Thank you. So maybe I may start from where I'm saying MPs have to play their role of representation, which means they have to go out to citizens, meet them, of course, in the right numbers, not big rallies, and ensure that they get views from the citizens. And then also, am I heard? Hello? Hello?
Yes, you're being heard now. There's no problem again. You're being heard.
Fine. And the issue of Pan-African Parliament, working with regional parliaments to ensure a continental response. Then I moved to what's the future, to the last 1-2 minutes to conclude. The future about the issue of parliaments playing an effective role during COVID-19. Again, go back to the parliament, African Parliament now could also link up with national parliaments, regional parliaments, and quickly come up with model procedures and standing rules in the advent of COVID-19 to enable parliaments, or we'll call it, to enable governments to move quickly on certain policy and regulatory issues about COVID. And then the whole issue of virtual sittings, question time, remote voting systems, remote tabling of questions, motions by MPs, fast-tracking bills. This has become very critical in the future of parliaments that will be relevant with COVID. They have to make sure that on these issues, parliaments are well positioned and they have in terms of their infrastructure. Then the issue of MPs, that they need to make inquiries, hear the citizens, some more effective methods, because the MPs now cannot just go around, conduct these big meetings and hearings, come up with a more robust modern systems, like in the UK, where committees are already receiving evidence on the effectiveness of the measures adopted by the British government, including committees on home affairs, Treasury Committee, Committee on Women and Equalities, the Health Committee, Video and Culture Social Committees, and the Committee on Science and Technology. There is a high level of understanding among UK politicians about how social distancing and lockdown conditions will create new vulnerabilities for women and children living in abusive circumstances. This issue has featured prominently in parliamentary engagement on policing responses to COVID-19. So we are saying MPs now have to open up, parliaments have to open up and respond to the challenges, the limitations that existed. Can we remove those limitations? Can we remove the rules and regulations or procedures that may inhibit progress within the issue, this environment of COVID-19? I think I will stop here for now and allow for more space for interaction with participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chief, for doing many things. You've given us quite a broad tour de force of what's going on, what the challenges are, and what can be done, and also what can be the role of parliamentarians at the national level, at the regional level, at the continental level, such as the level where you sit. And you have also made sure that you've done it in less than the time that was allocated to you, for which we are very grateful. We believe there'll be opportunities for a much more interactive discussion after we hear the third panel, which is the final panel. But I'll just let you know, and I'll put it also on the box, that the Africa Law Tech Association, an initiative hosted by an organization known as the Lawyers Hub in Nairobi, Kenya, have innovated something that they call legal hackathons. So they get dozens of lawyers, many of them young lawyers, volunteering, working online, collaborating online in a single document, formulating a draft COVID-19 law for a country for consideration of their governments. Because they're lawyers and professionals coming from different expertise, it means different elements are brought on board very quickly into the draft law, which is then harmonized and streamlined, and the draft is then presented to the arms of government. This enables us to have something that the Honorable Chairperson, Dr. Solomon Ayele Daso, had said, that we need comprehensive, and which you have also said, Chief, that we need comprehensive COVID-19 laws, so that everything that is being done by our government political, economic, social, cultural, is being done under a valid law, validly passed by Parliament. We think this is a good practice that we should recommend in many other countries and in many legislatures, including to PARP. So, colleagues, the third intervention will be a panel discussion on the role of civil society in advocating for solutions to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. And we are privileged to have with us two eminent and dynamic sisters, comrades, who have distinguished themselves in service to humanity and service to Africa through the agency of organized civil society. And these two ladies are Ms. Maseho Madzwamuze and Ms. Colette Letlojane. Maseho is the Chief Executive Officer of the Southern African Trust. Prior to joining the Trust, she worked for the Open Society Initiative for Southern Africa, or CISA, as the team leader for the Economic and Social Justice Cluster. Her other assignments have been with the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, and the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN. She's a widely experienced social and economic policy analyst, focusing on women's rights, sustainable development, economic justice, environment, and climate change. She has worked with social movements, advocating for community rights, for economic inclusion, and for rights-based approaches to development in Africa. She is a member of the IUCN Commission on Environmental Economics and Social Policy, where she serves as a chair of the theme on business, best practice, and accountability. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Environmental Science and Sociology and a Master of Arts degree in Environmental Sciences, and is a 2020 Aspen New Voices Fellow. On the other hand, Ms. Colette Letlojane is Executive Director of the Human Rights Institute of Southern Africa, HURISA, which is based in Johannesburg, South Africa. She was also recently appointed as chairperson of the CSO Forum, the Civil Society Forum on the Pan-African Parliament. Colette has a distinguished career spanning over 20 years, focusing on regional human rights, international human rights mechanisms, promotion and protection of human and people's rights in South Africa, in Africa, and beyond. She has an in-depth understanding of the African human rights system and has been a very influential leader, including when we meet as the NGO Forum for the African Commission on Human and People's Rights in Banjul. She's a member of the Commission's support group on freedoms of peaceful assembly and of association. She's a member of the Southern African Development Community Human Rights Defenders Network, the SADC Human Rights Defenders Network, which has actually given her an award. She sits on the steering committee of the National Action Plan on Racism, Racial Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance of the Republic of South Africa, and also for the National Action Plan on Women, Peace, and Security, pursuant to Resolution 1325 of the UN Security Council. Colette holds a Baccalaureus Juris, a B. Juris diploma from the University of the Northwest, and a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of South Africa, UNISA. Comrades, the two panelists had been allocated a maximum of 10 minutes each, but I similarly suggest that they see whether they can take less time and they'll get an opportunity to make further inputs in the interactive session. I now welcome Ms. Maseho Madzwamuze to make her lead remarks for this panel. Welcome, Maseho.
Thank you, Don. Honorable members of Parliament, of the Pan-African Parliament, the Clerk of the Parliament, members of civil society, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we are convening at a very trying time, and it's great that we've been able to hold this dialogue virtually. Just starting with a personal position so that I can give you a sense of place and context. I'm in South Africa and we've just gone into 60 days of lockdown. A time and experience which has had different impacts on various people, all depending on their age, their socioeconomic conditions, their location, race, and class. In his address last night, President Ramaphosa captured quite well the differentiated experiences and impacts of COVID when he said that the burden of the lockdown has been most severe for those who are least able to bear it. I think, having listened to the couple of presenters who spoke before me, and just reflecting on the words of President Ramaphosa last night, it is not accidental that some sections of society have been unable to overcome the economic stress of COVID, while others have been able to weather the storm. The explanation for this is fairly simple, and many of you had begun to point out the pre-existing inequalities that have been further compounded by COVID. Millions of African citizens are really facing a daily struggle of the threat of hunger, which is a result of the various lockdown measures that we have been experiencing. And most of you have talked about the difficult living conditions, as well as the difficult spaces of economic activity that the majority of the African citizens are active in. And because of the social and physical distancing regulations, many of them have been unable to carry on with the economic activities that allow them to live a life of dignity or to put food on the table for their families. Much has been written about the pandemic and the many moments such as these that have been before us in the past. And many of these have presented an opportunity for change. COVID is not the first crisis that we're dealing with. We've had many other crises in the history of humanity. A lot of observers talk about the Spanish flu, which wiped out more than 10 million lives within a space of 2 years between 1918 and 1920. And the movement and the spread of the pandemic of the Spanish flu was very much similar to the trends that we're seeing with the COVID pandemic. In the last 50 years, we've had many such moments as well, being in the form of health pandemics, natural disasters, economic crisis, environmental crisis, and much more. We've lived as a continent through the pandemic of HIV and AIDS, which wreaked havoc throughout the continent. We've had the impact of the economic financial crisis in 2008 and the ramifications which have lived with us for many years and continue to live with us. In other parts of the world, we were then reminded again of the impact of the economic crisis when it hit Greece, and we started talking about the Greek economic crisis and the kind of global response to that, including the austerity measures that followed, which were very much similar to the structural adjustment programs that Africa had lived through for more than 50 years. We've had the Ebola outbreak and our responses to that. We are living through a climate emergency that is ongoing simultaneously with what we're experiencing with COVID-19. I'm going through these moments to drive the point home that what we are going through now is not new. We have been presented with so many moments before for change. The question now is, are we going to draw from the past, and are we going to be listening to the messages from the future? And I'd like to suggest here that the message that is coming to us from the future is a message that says the current economic, political, and social system is not sustainable. It does not put human well-being at the center. It drives environmental degradation, and we're gambling with the lives and the inheritance of future generations. And I was glad to hear my fellow speakers before me mentioning the interconnectedness of what seems to be a health pandemic with the broader political, economic, and ecological systems. I was asked to share experiences on civil society responses. But I want to also draw out that civil society responses are not happening in a vacuum. And in identifying what the responses have been in our fields and the work that a number of our partners have been involved in, I've also taken time to glean what a number of thought leaders as well as civil society activists have been saying about this particular moment. And I am going to take us through at least 9 lessons that I have drawn from the material that I've gleaned through. The first thing that I want to do before I get to that is to basically reiterate the point again, which was made earlier, that through many of the periods that I spoke about at the beginning, Africa has largely been vulnerable. And at the heart of our vulnerability is the pre-existing socioeconomic capacity and the weak capacity of the state to respond. We need to take a hard and honest look at what chips away at the capacity of the continent to be resilient to shocks. And once we understand the drivers of our vulnerability, we can begin to understand what stands in the way of us reaching the aspirations that are contained in Agenda 2063 and a lot of the progressive instruments that we have as part of the Africa Agenda. Because when Africa wins or fares better, as we see in some aspects of the COVID moment, we should also interrogate what it is that we're getting right. Some of you spoke about the predictions that we were going to see mass deaths throughout Africa, and that in fact the reality has been slightly different from what was anticipated. And that has to do with the investments in public health system, despite the impacts of the structural adjustment programs. There are some countries that were able to get it right in terms of investing in the public health system and investing in social services. But when you look at when that investment happened, it happened at a critical moment in our history when we were struggling for both political and economic liberation. Something happened along the lines. We know that the impact that the drive towards privatization has had, and also the drive towards market liberalization, and the drive towards attracting foreign direct investment has done. What it did was to put the aspirations and the needs of the citizens right at the bottom of the priorities while we focused on what the rest of the world was demanding of Africa. Recent weeks coming back to civil society, recent weeks have shown us the crucial role that civil society as frontline sectors play. And again, looking at our history of liberation, we know the role that civil society in its different formations have been able to deliver the liberation of our people and the liberation of our countries. As our communities rely on parliament, such as the Pan-African Parliament, for strategic and long-term solutions, it is the services of organizations and community foundations and civil society organizations on the ground that are sought for in terms of critical daily needs to survive in the times of crisis. The first point of call for communities is civil society organizations, is the community-based organizations. It's the activists and the leaders within our communities. Now, to the lessons that I promised you, the 8 lessons that I promised you, there might be 9. I think there are 9 because I wanted to keep with the odd numbers to reflect the odd time that we're living through. Most of these are aligned to some of the critical aspirations of Agenda 2063. Aspiration 1, which is a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. Aspiration 3, which is an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. And aspiration number 6, which is an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially women, youth, and caring for the children. Some of the ideas that I have gleaned and I'm referring to as messages from the future are the following. From COVID, we're learning about the fragility of human beings. our fragility has been exposed. And at the same time, we are also getting a sense of the clear link between the human health and nature, the health of nature and the health of ecosystems. The message that is coming through is that society, economy, and nature are an intricate part of the same web. The fact that we're facing, again, a health pandemic alongside with a climate crisis, for me, is something that drives home this fundamental message in very powerful ways. The second message is that we are not safe until we are all safe. And this has been the central mantra for our COVID Solidarity campaign, which is driven by the Southern Africa Trust, the African Philanthropy Network, Trust Africa, and many other Pan-African movements who have joined the call to mobilize African resources to respond to the crisis of COVID. This comes out of the realization that COVID-19 has been non-discriminatory. It has attacked humanity across class, race, gender, religion, and across the world. It has sent a strong message that not only is inequality bad for business and bad for our politics, but it is bad for our collective health. I think it was my comrade earlier, Charles, who spoke about the majority of our populations living in slums and in poor neighborhoods, and the fact that COVID remains a hotspot in these areas. I can see Don has put his camera on. I will try and speed up Don, but it was difficult to cut 10 minutes into a 5 minutes intervention. The third fundamental message, which is coming through from civil society, from the future, is that of the care economy is essential and needs to be recognized and compensated accordingly. And I think this is an important one to highlight because feminist economists, and African feminist economists for that matter, have been saying this for a very long time. And in a time of crisis, we have seen the burden of care and the extent to which this falls on women, and the extent to which this falls on the healthcare workforces who have been exposed to the greatest risk of infection. Somebody spoke about social protection earlier. In fact, they were speaking about social policy, and I would say that the message from the future is that social protection is essential for cushioning people in precarious work and people from poor socioeconomic background. And we ought to be thinking about social protection as a mechanism for redistribution within the broader ambit of social policy. Food sovereignty, again, a message that is coming through is that food sovereignty is key. And we have seen in a number of countries that under lockdown, within 3 weeks of lockdown, many families were beginning to struggle to feed their own families. Small-scale farmers were not able to move their produce across borders once our national borders had been closed down. Going into the future, I think production of localized food supplies and production of food for local consumption and national food security is important. And we have to be looking at how we invest in the agricultural sector. Number 6 is that the developmental state is essential, and the developmental state is essential. And in the response to COVID, we ought to be looking at the extent to which our states are seizing opportunities for citizens and also seizing opportunities to fight inequality head on. Number 7 is that the popular economy, which is sometimes referred to as the informal economy, some of you spoke about that, is the real economy, as it accounts for 85% of all employment. And overlooking this reality drives economic vulnerability. We saw how in the economic relief packages, overlooking the sector basically meant that we were pumping billions into economic activities that were not making a difference to the majority of our citizens. Number 8 is one around unsustainable debt levels. illicit financial flows that undermine the capacity of African states to deploy socially responsive policies. And number 9 is a focus on creative industries. Throughout the lockdown phases and the emotional and psychological impact of this, we have seen young people, artists, step up and be a shining light in terms of mobilizing solidarity and keeping the spirits of citizens alive and high throughout these difficult times. And going into the future, this is a sector that we ought to prioritize and look at how we support, either through the provision of cultural funds and so forth. I'd just like to point out that some of the insights that I've gone through are gleaned from a letter that we have written collectively as a group of African feminists addressed to the special envoy for the newly inaugurated Access to COVID Tools Accelerator. And I would encourage you to look out for that statement as you think about what the recovery period and what the recovery process may look like. And as I wrap up, Don, I just wanted to go back to what I said about the role that civil society had played and how civil society had stepped up to play their role as frontline organizations. Like many actors in the field, we went through a process of being unsure on what the right action ought to have been. But quickly, once people's health was secure, there was a lot of activity that civil society was leading on. Ensuring that citizens were part of the discourse and the narrative around what needed to be done in the time of crisis and what recovery should look like. Civil society have been advocating for inclusive responses and highlighting the issues that I talked about earlier around the plight of populations that were in the blind spot of policymakers, what it takes to have inclusive COVID relief packages that respond to the daily struggle of informal traders, of communities in crowded neighborhoods, of women in the informal sector, small businesses, and so forth. We've also seen civil society mobilize to provide support and raise awareness on the increase of violence against women and children. And as we were thinking about lockdown, very few were talking about the risk of women and children being locked down in abusive environments. It took civil society highlighting these issues for many governments to step up and provide support for women and children. The establishment of solidarity fundraising campaigns. And I would encourage members of this parliament to actually look out to those campaigns and see how you can lend your voice and how you can contribute to mobilizing African citizens giving towards donations that are going to be supporting the most vulnerable. Many civil society organizations have
I would say you stop at that point. You know, you've actually been going for 19 minutes. So I would say just say your final word. Yeah.
Yes. So I will wrap up there, Dawn, and just say that the lessons from the future that I spoke about will only remain a dream without active civic engagement.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marcel, and sorry for rushing you. It's just that we have a long day ahead of us and we don't want to be unfair to the listening participants or the other panelists in the next panel. Without further ado, I will now invite Colette. And again, Colette, I'll just repeat my request that see how you can summarize so we actually do leave some time for an interactive thereafter. I can see that we've got only 12 minutes to the end of this session. Welcome, Colette.
Good day. It's still in the morning. Thank you, Mr. Moderator, Mr. Don Dea, the CEO of the Pan-African Lawyers Union, Mistress of Ceremonies, Mrs. Lynn Chiwanda Mira, Senior International Relations Officer, Pan-African Parliament, Honorable Boaras Jamel, Acting President of the Pan-African Parliament, Honorable Chief Fortune Churambira, Vice President of the Pan-African Parliament, Dr. Admo Kambuze, Acting Director of the Peace and Security Department of African Union, Honorable Commissioner Solomon Derso, Chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Mr. Gail Massa Haron, Acting Clerk of the Pan-African Parliament, Honorable Members of Parliament, State Delegates, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol duly observed. It is my singularly honor and privilege to speak at this august virtual meeting commemorating Africa Day. Let me extend my gratitude to Honorable Boaras Jamel, the Acting President of Pan-African Parliament, for creating this platform and opportunity for civil society to engage with Pan-African Parliament. I think it's like you brought Parliament to the people, because Parliament is the voice of the people. We are very grateful that you have chosen an appropriate time and day to bring Parliament to us. I am speaking here as the Director of the Human Rights Institute, and then also as the Chairperson of the civil society that is working on PAP. This is the new election that has happened last year. The civil society has been advocating for many years, those that have been focusing on strengthening African institutions, they'll remember the hurdles, the processes. So we've continued advocating up until last year when the civil society met and elections was made. And then there were about 7 people that were elected to sit in the committee, and that people met, and then I was elected. So we were supposed to be engaging with Pan-African Parliament. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has made it difficult for us. My focus was to look at the significance of this day. The significance of this day is really very loaded, because when you look at the underlying, the foundation, the founding principle that guided our AU forefathers, they were inspired by the ideal of Pan-Africanism. And in that, they wanted to promote unity, solidarity, cohesion, and cooperation among the peoples of Africa and the African states. And as we all know that South Africa is a president of the AU, which is also driving the theme for 2020 of silencing the guns. We were so inspired when the president announced the national disaster and the period that was about to focus on lockdown. How he, engaged the military, the army, the South African Defence Force, guiding them and instructing them how to assist, provide support to the nation, to the society, and to the police. We were very much feeling, secured that we will be protected. The nation is actually trying to protect us from the spread of COVID-19. I also want to read the message that was mentioned by Chief Justice Mogoeng. He has said that the lockdown has given us an opportunity to reflect on how materialistic we are at times and how much the need is out there. The need that must not be theorized or intellectualized, but a need that cries out for practical steps to be taken by each citizen to share. This resonates with the AU funding principles that we need to embrace as Africans on a daily basis. And the fact that we have this COVID-19, this is where we're supposed to be leading in the world, emulating these African values that we are always boast about and speak about. This unprecedented situation, it has turned people's life, around, and some people have been impacted more than the others. We have the most vulnerable that have been devastated. I think my previous speakers have referred to them. But I think the scenario that I'm trying to bring here is that the fact that they live in overcrowded environments, there is no safe water, their life is at risk, there is no sanitation, and their livelihoods have been threatened. That solidarity, I think the government should have come up with a plan catering specifically for the low income market or communities, because some of them, they are not even secured. They don't have UIF, unemployment insurance. They rely on the relief grants that the government has promised. We have realized that inside the very same process which is created to help the needy, the social relief stimulus, they are not even reaching this community because there's deep-rooted corruption in our country. Now, when COVID-19 arrived, it found some of the institutions and the structures on the ground in very bad condition. So we are not blaming COVID-19. Yeah, we're saying COVID-19 has aggravated the circumstances, but had the government played its role in making sure that it manages the country's affairs, especially it provides proper care, it provides the necessary healthy living conditions for people in rural communities and also in informal settlement, they would not have been devastated. Now, also, when these communities who are living in overcrowded communities, they are required to remain indoors and to do what we call social distancing. However, if 20 people occupy a shack, how do we expect them to remain in one room, in one space for so many weeks? It's almost 2 months. Those communities, they were not even allowed to stretch out or to walk around within their premises. The police attack and the way the defense was entering into some of the premises, attacking people, and law enforcement was done in an inhuman and degrading manner. There's murders that has been committed, harassment of people, and arbitrary arrests that had taken place to people that were offenders. But in terms of the law of South Africa, which is enforced for managing the disaster, because we are under disaster, the police are required, or the state security is required to arrest and not to commit all those offenses that they were committing. And then also, what was of particular concern was that the migrants, the refugees, and asylum seekers were facing, and even now they still face, challenges in terms of receiving the relief grant, and some face deportations and repatriations that were happening between South Africa and also, I think, Botswana was also doing these repatriations. Also, what we've seen was the demolitions of shacks in informal settlement and evictions of people, damaging of property. So we've been asking ourselves, where have we gone wrong? How did we manage to miss the theme of 2020 of silencing the gun? And also, us as the president of the AU, how do we miss the basic principle that are founded in the Constitutive Act, which promote solidarity, unity, and peace? We've realized as well that those who are on the front line, the essential service provider, for example, in hospital, in places of care, they do not have adequate protection, personal protection equipment. There has been a lot of protests that are taking place in the country, and the manner of responses have been very unacceptable. This is where we still asking, how are we protecting citizens to not be contact coronavirus, but at the same time, the beatings, the violations are taking place. So there's competition of rights here, and there's double standard in terms of promoting and protecting the right to health. And rights are, one of the speakers did mention that, I think it was Mashego, mentioned that rights, human rights are interrelated. You cannot, prioritize one right over the other. The minute you limit this, the right to economic and social right, your civil and political rights, like now, has been affected, and all those rights get affected. We have seen civil society, for example, playing such phenomenal role. The civil society had to first reprogram, redivert their own programs. They had to fundraise. They had to look for resources. They had to, contribute, look for funding so that they can support some of the families and individuals that continue standing on the sides of the road, queuing, looking for support. So the civil society is commended for taking this. Some of them have not even been granted accreditation to serve as volunteers or essential service provider. And they have conducted research. We are also doing that, documenting violations of human rights. And then we have been disseminating information around within the SADC, and also at the African Union level. We have been engaging with the African Commission on Human and People Rights, presenting a number of statements and petition calling the Commission to intervene. Regarding a strengthening of the Pan-African Parliament, Pan-African Parliament has got very progressive mechanisms. And those mechanisms, I must say that they're very engaging and innovative for civil society to participate. The rules of procedure, for example, of the Pan-African Parliament, they elaborate the powers, the functions of members of parliament, and they can participate in awareness raising. Awareness raising has been conducted by a number of civil society in terms of educating the elderly, the people who are living in rural areas, who have got no understanding, who are illiterate, and we've been also trying to simplify some of the very complicated, complex information that is circulated around, and also reaching out to community radio stations speaking in local languages, because there has been this perception as well that people think that COVID-19 is attacking the older people and not the young people, or COVID-19 is for Europeans and not for African people. So now, how do we change that mindset and to provide that kind of understanding to people, so that people can lead, they can protect themselves, and they can play a role? In South Africa, the National Disaster Act, which is regulating the lockdown, it provides a number of platforms. There's a advisory forum that needs to be set up at a municipal level. At that advisory level, civil society, they can engage and raise their concerns, so that some of the problems are tackled in a coordinated and integrated manner. So participation of civil society and the Pan-African Parliament, I just see that we can complement the PAP in terms of us able to bringing or identifying those civil society, because we are working on the ground, we are working with networks, and we can encourage such engagement or awareness to take place. That will actually ensure that PAP is made effectiveness in terms of some of the powers. And then also the civil society support PAP to promote human and people's rights. This is one of their functions. And they can do so through their committees. They've got about 10 or 11 committees. Some of their committees like Committee on Justice and Human Rights, Committee on Health, Committee on Gender, Family, Youth, People with Disability, and all of these committees are very, very important. But I'm just looking at the dynamics of the trends and the challenges that have been faced within the continent, especially within the SADC, how this committee would have really impacted positively on the ground, how would have benefited PAP to make PAP more effective in terms of engaging or running that awareness. And then also there's a process of getting petition. PAP can receive petitions made by a civil society or by the citizens complaining about particular issues. They can conduct public hearings, they can call witnesses, and then they can even request for supportive evidence or information. And a person who is not a member of PAP can even attend the proceedings and speak at proceedings at any AU proceeding that PAP will be conducting. This provides ample opportunities for PAP as an institution that is given mandate as well to consolidate democratic institution and also...
Sorry, Colette, to also rush you up. Sorry to rush you up. We've been going 16 minutes. Please try and see if you can wrap up. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. And then democratic culture and also good governance. I just wanted to mention the very last one, that they also can complement. I'm happy that we have the chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. So there needs to be that complementarity within the AU organs, like the African Court, like the Expert on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. At the African Commission, there are statements, civil society produce a shadow report, and then the Commission produce concluding observations. Those concluding observations, they can be brought to PAP, for PAP to monitor enforcement and implementation of improvements that are called by any organ of the AU. Thank you very much, Don, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much to Colette and also to Maseho. And sorry for rushing you a bit there towards the end, just in order to try to catch up on time, which we had lost from the beginning. So it wasn't necessarily that this panel lost it. Be that as it may, we'd like to open the floor to some interactive, it ended up being a bit brief, just so as not to inconvenience the next panel, but let's have one nonetheless. And I've been informed that there are a number of honorable members of the Pan-African Parliament who also just want to add on to the debate right now, provide further insights, and engage the public better. So we're welcoming them at this stage to use the raise hand function that's on the technology we're using on Zoom, so that we'd be able to see them and we'd be able to enable them to make some brief remarks. So we'd like to see your hands raised up, then the control room will be able to enable the audio to work for you, so that then you're able to address us directly, either in French or in English. Okay, I don't see any hands up. Although I saw something like Honorable Pemi Madojina was about to make a statement. You're welcome, Honorable Pemi. We somehow can't hear your voice, and then that will be followed by Honorable Dr. Tapiwa.
Thank you.
Sorry, this is a control room. This is just to inform you that whoever is coming in, you need to select your language. There's a button for interpretation. You need to select the language so that we know which language you're going to use for the session. There's a button interpretation. Okay.
Since we still can't hear Honorable Pemi Majorina, I don't know if one of you can call her directly on the phone to help walk her through. And then
we can hear Honorable Pemi. We can hear her.
You can hear now. Okay, then go ahead, Honorable Pemi.
Sorry, Honorable, you've not selected the language. Click on interpretation and select English. Click on select English, Honorable. Interpretation, then select English.
Honorable Dr. Tapiwa, can you be heard? Because if so, then maybe you can start while the team tries to help Honorable Pemi to be heard. Can you try and speak, Honorable Dr. Tapiwa? Hello, control room. On my part, I can't hear either Honorable Member of Parliament when they try to speak. I don't know if you can hear them on your side, if somebody, maybe Madam Lane, can step in so that at least we don't lose time. If the majority of the people can hear them, then we go ahead. Okay, so Madam Lane, please go ahead from here.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I wanted to appreciate the inputs by all panelists. They were spot on. And on my side, I want to say, as we are facing this deadly disease, COVID-19, it is very much important that as the continent, we must step up our program of uniting our own continent. But this COVID-19 has indeed exposed underdevelopment, inequality, poverty, and lack of transformation. And therefore, my submission is that out of what the Vice President of PAP said on the role of Parliament, we must ensure that Parliament sits at all levels on extraordinary platforms to ensure that we reprioritize the country's needs and respond direct to COVID-19 through making it a point that we set up clear targets of ensuring that we want to develop the areas where the majority of this continent are, especially the health facilities as well as education. Whilst we are saving lives, saving livelihoods, we must as well save the economy. The civil society, it must instill a culture of responsibility to all citizens of the continent. The responsibility of ensuring that we adhere to all health protocols to curb the spread of this virus. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. And moving on swiftly to Honorable Dr. Tapiwa.
We can't get him. Can we move on to the next MP? I think Abdullahi Ali from Kenya.
Okay, Honorable Dr. Tapia, we can't hear you yet. While they try to figure that, let's see who's next. On my screen, next looks like Honorable Abubakar Sidi.
Hello?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear. I can hear the translation.
Okay.
Yes, I can.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for this very important work. Before starting the next session, I would like to just respond to what we have just heard. I thought that I heard towards the end that the population, in fact, was not the first priority, that they were not really part of the decision process. I would like to actually contradict that, because I think that through this illness, what we have noticed is that all thought and all legislative changes, that all decisions taken by African countries, in fact, have been towards the protection of their people. So this catastrophe, which in fact was announced for Africa, in fact, doesn't seem to have yet taken place. But we need to recognize that we will need, of course, to improve whatever will need to be done. I think we need to talk about this in the next session. But I think we need to recognize that African decision makers have taken this situation very, very seriously and have given their response to the whole world. In terms of the role of the parliamentarians, nationally speaking, and at the Pan-African Parliament, I think we all agree that parliamentarians need, of course, to come to legislate, in fact, continentally speaking. And this is why we need to accelerate model laws so that all African countries speak with the same voice, whether it be the executive or the legislative. And I think I will stop here for the moment. It was just that I needed to respond to what I thought I heard in terms of the vision of things right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Abubakar. I apologize to Honorable Dr. Tapiwa. Apparently, I was the only one who couldn't hear you, and a majority of the other people were able to hear you. So I request that you go ahead.
Monsieur Delal, je peux parler?
Yeah.
Somebody seems to want to speak. I think it's Honorable John Dukaga.
Okay. So I would say Honorable Dr. Tapiwa speaks. Then I have on the queue Honorable Elio Sanchez, followed by Honorable Abdullahi Ali, followed by Honorable Jean. So go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think the role of us MPs cannot be underestimated. The members of parliament must be given budgetary support so that they can work with the government departments in an effort to roll out social protection programs like food donations, donating masks, donating detergents and sanitizers to the people that we represent. That is a very key role that parliamentarians can also do, including public awareness on the COVID-19 pandemic. Because we live with the people, we represent the people, therefore we must be capacitated to go out there and meet the people and talk about this pandemic and the possible mitigatory measures. The other role that MPs should play is to make sure that there is transparency and accountability in the mobilization of resources, including those resources that are donated to mitigate the impact of COVID. A lot of money is coming from multilateral organizations like the World Bank, IMF, and other agencies. It is important that MPs monitor the deployment of those resources so that they do not go into individual pockets of leaders, but rather they are used for the purposes for which they are donated. So transparency is key. The other issue is that we must make sure that the laws that are enacted, they also respect human rights and also constitutional rights of the citizens. There are a lot of draconian laws which are being promulgated in the absence of the sitting of parliament. And these laws also impinge on freedom of movement, right to work, and so on and so forth. So it is important that MPs are not left behind in the programming of COVID-related policies as well as legislations, so that we move together as a whole of government approach. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Dr. Tapiwa. Next on the queue, I have Honorable Helio Sanchez, followed by Honorable Abdullahi Ali, and then Honorable Genevieve Morel. Sorry if I'm massacring the correct pronunciation of your names. And maybe you can just take a second to introduce yourself, because we might have participants who might not know you. So, Honorable Sanchez.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear the translation.
I would first of all like to thank very much the acting chair, my friend, also the fourth vice president of the Pan-African Parliament. I would like to greet all my parliamentarians, all my colleagues, and all the orators who have spoken very, very well here. To say that yes, today is the African Day, and this is a great day for us. Very important to celebrate our population despite the situation we find ourselves in. I think that in terms of what the role of the Parliament is, and I think the fourth vice president said it very well. I think he asked us, in fact, what should we do today so that our Parliament can continue to function? We need to adapt, of course, the functioning of the Parliament to the situation, to COVID-19. This pandemic has, of course, created problems for us and for the African continent. The fourth vice president also gave several examples of several countries who have adapted their internal rules and procedures, and in Europe, of course, and everywhere. Cape Verde, for example, was one of the examples. They've had to reduce the number of parliamentarians when they have meetings, so just enough, in fact, to be able to continue to make laws and to take decisions so that they can reach a consensus to approve laws. So our parliament also it's functioning through video conferencing. So that MPs, for example, can participate through video conferencing and can do it, in fact, from their own homes. And of course, this diminishes the risks of COVID-19. I just very quickly wanted to address the issue that we need to take into consideration the weakest, those who suffer the most through COVID-19. Workers who've many unfortunately have lost their jobs, particularly, for example, in construction. We can see that now, and in aviation. And in aviation, because as you can see now, of course, there are no flights, so many of them have lost their jobs or are temporarily on leave. So, of course, we need to take all this into consideration, and we need to, of course, prevent them from continuing out of work. We need to also take into consideration, as has been said by one of the speakers, of the informal workers in Africa. It is, in fact, those informal workers who are behind the economy in Africa and who are suffering enormously. African governments need to find a solution. They need to find funding, bank funding, so that these people can restart their activities and also be able to face this problem. I think that is all I would like to say for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And next in line was Honorable Abdullahi Ali. And this is a general question. I'm not saying that you have to focus on this, Honorable Ali. I'm sure you had your own points ready. But one of the interesting questions that I'm seeing in the chat box that we can ask all parliamentarians generally, and we debate in the course of the day, is how can PAP get our national governments to invest more in research? And not just national level research, but coordinated continent-wide research. As the person asking, Wambua Kituko from Kenya has put, he says that we have seen some promising scientific solutions at national level, but they are too small, too micro, given the continental scale of our problem and the interconnectedness of our problem. So how could PAP help to get our national governments to invest more in research? And are you talking directly to the African Centers for Disease Control? Thank you very much. Meanwhile, Honorable Ali.
Thank you very much. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you very clearly, Honorable Ali.
Okay, thank you. My name is Dr. Abdullahi Ali. I'm a senator from Kenya and a member of PAP. My issue is that the pandemic was, we all know it, and has happened all over the world. Africa might have survived a bit just because, I believe it's not because of the African government. It's only that it's because of the resilience of the Africans. I think we have had a lot of pandemics, as was said earlier, and we have suffered a lot, and we are resilient, and that's possibly why we are suffering. I mean, we are suffering less. That's my take, really. And the other reason we are not seeing much is that because we are not doing a lot of testing. If you go, I'm in Nairobi now, if you go to the streets, people are all over. We are supposed to be under lockdown in Nairobi. We are not supposed to travel out of Nairobi. And if you see this town, it's not much different, except that possibly the hotels and the bars and the religious places, those are the only places with not many people, but everything else is working. I believe that Parliament, as parliamentarians, we are not doing enough, to be sincere. And that's the reality. When the government brought the lockdown and the curfews, everybody decided to run and stay at home. But what happens to the slum dwellers? What happens to those ones who live in poverty all around the city of Nairobi or every other big town in Africa? As the lady, one of the panelists said earlier, when things go wrong and people get into hunger, what do you expect? Of course, and sometimes back in South Africa, we are seeing that people are also doing some looting, but it will happen everywhere else. And things will go haywire if we are not controlled. Sorry, people are calling and I'm on a phone, so I'm disappearing once in a while. But my take is that as parliamentarians, we are not doing enough. We have left in Kenya recently, it was in the press that that's something close to 400,000 or 40,000 US dollars was finished within 1 month just because in the Ministry of Health by people taking tea and mandazis. The mandazis are just some snacks. So you expect things like that to be worse and to continue if there's no proper supervision and there's no transparency. So parliamentarians have to pull up their socks. In the Senate, we meet once a week and in Kenya here. The number has been reduced. At least half of the members are meeting, but you cannot perform the way you expect to do. In the National Assembly, they're still on recess, but hopefully they'll come back. We have a bill now, the Pandemic Response and Management Bill in the Senate, which we are processing and hopefully might be able to help the people in Kenya. But in all African countries, I think we need to do more. We should not leave everything to the executive to do the way they want. Parliamentarians, as the representatives of the people, should come up and perform their duties. If we are afraid and we don't want to intermingle with our people, then I don't know who is going to help them. So one way or the other, while in Africa it's not easy to do social distancing, to avoid crowds, because in our homes in Nairobi called Kibera, where there are 10 people, the father, the mother, or 6, 8 children. How will they avoid crowding? How will they do social distancing? So when you go out in the street, it's the same. So some of these issues we can't avoid, but we will have to tell our people whatever we can. And the most important thing, which is even more important than the coronavirus, is hunger. We have to see how we can help our people, and the parliamentarians have to come up and do what they need to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ali. And I see next in the queue is Honorable Jean Dukaga. I see Honorable Jean Dukaga. You want to take the floor?
Good morning, everyone. Are you able to hear me right now? I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. On my part, I can hear you. I can hear the translation.
You may speak, Honorable Dukaga. Can you hear me? My name is Jean-Pierre Dukaga from Togo. I'm delighted to participate in the proceedings of this morning. But I wanted to say that the COVID-19 pandemic has shown the weakness of our economies. So in our countries, we should concentrate on the human being, as it was said. There should be a concentration on health. And our economies need to access health services. And then there is governance. We need to know that governance is very important, amongst others, democracy. And there are elections, there are civil wars, and that is not good for our economies. We cannot look after public finances of our countries properly in the context of this pandemic. COVID-19 gives us the opportunity to rethink, to redefine our situations. Without health, there is no economy. We have spoken about multiculturalism. There is COVID-19, and each person in his or her little corner is trying to find a solution. How many African countries have gotten together to try to find a solution? There needs to be an African response to this pandemic. It's very important. Another aspect is the evaluation of public policies. These have to be assessed by parliamentarians. Something else is to strengthen the local economy or popular economy, or the informal economy needs to be strengthened. As far as the Gabonese parliament is concerned, we have done tracking for all parliamentarians. They have all been tested. And those who know that they are positive are isolated. Let me finish by saying that since COVID-19, a lot of countries have adopted emergency laws. It's very important. Some countries are taking advantage of COVID-19. And because of the lockdown, sometimes laws that are not supposed to be voted on are voted on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Jean Dukaga. I think from what I can see, all the MPs that wanted to take the floor have taken the floor. If Ms. Genevieve Morel from the Seychelles Parliament and from the SADC Parliamentary Forum would like to take the floor, I welcome her to take the floor now. Would you like to take the floor now? You're welcome. That will be the last speaker. Then we'll allow the panelists 1 minute each just to give their final remarks, just one remark each. You don't get to answer everything. And then I'll hand over back to Madam Lane Chaumira, who will lead us to the next session. So Genevieve.
You're muted, madam. Please unmute. Pardon, madam, we can't hear you. Select language and you select English and interpretation so that we can be able to hear you. There's interpretation.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you, Madam.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, sorry about that. I was saying good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for giving me a little space to speak this afternoon. I would like to bring our contribution from the National Parliament of Seychelles on what we have been doing during the crisis. Late in 2019, the House deliberated on the appropriation bill for 2020. But then during the crisis, we asked the Minister for Finance to come back with an amended appropriation bill because we had to have a few cuts here and there because we had to accommodate for new demands during the crisis. We had to give a little bit more funds to the Ministry of Health, for example, the Ministry of Education, because they have to relook at how the schools are organized, online tuition and everything. So the Minister for Finance came back with the appropriation bill, and the members deliberated long and hard on it, and we have come up with another amended bill. So the funds are now more adequately redistributed within the major and within the sectors that funds are most needed. And we also had to amend the public infectious diseases regulations. And this was done in order to allow for the introduction of laws pertaining to lockdowns, curfews, and social distancing and public gathering. And we also had a suspension of prescription and time limitation period because we had to review the lockdown period and public gathering and everything else regarding movement of our citizens, schools reopening and so forth. And I am happy to say that for the time being, we don't have any active cases. We had 11 cases, all have been treated, and we didn't have any deaths. So we are now back to out of lockdown, but still social distancing is being implemented. And we still cannot have very big gatherings. And even in the schools, they have had to reopen according to very strict guidelines from the Ministry of Health. And since the crisis began, we've had many motions and urgent questions and private notice questions that members have brought before the House for discussions. We've been very, very active, and I'm happy to note that government officials have worked very closely with the members to implement as and when required. And my wish is for Africa across the board that we will be able to find a common agenda, a model or something that we can work upon to alleviate this crisis. And maybe we can use COVID-19 as a benchmark to be able to deal with other crises or pandemics that we may face in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Genevieve. And I'm actually really glad that we gave you an opportunity to intervene and share with us some best practices from Seychelles. I really like the idea that very early your parliament reconvened and passed a supplementary budget. But I even like more the idea that members of parliament, including backbenchers, are very active and that they're asking parliamentary questions, private notice questions, private questions, and so on, to hold the government to account and to make the government be able to give qualitative information. That is actually the best answer to the question asked on the text by Henri Christine, who was complaining of access to information and that many of our governments have locked down, but they've also locked down information. So now we don't even have quality information on what is happening and what we should do. So thank you very much for that. Now, as we wrap up, and very soon, I'll be calling our overall director of programs, of the ceremonies for the day, Lynn Chiwanamira, to speak and lead us on to the next session, I would now like to allow the panelists 1 minute each to just give one final point in the order in which we spoke. So can we start with Mr. Charles Wangadia? Just 1 minute to give your final remark or insight, and then we move. Charles? If Charles is not ready at the moment, just in order to save time, we can come back to him. Can we go to the Honorable Chief? Honorable Chief Charumbira, are you available nearby?
I'm ready. Can you hear me?
Yes, Honorable Chief. Now we can hear you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? In 1 minute, be counted, stand up, and be seen to adopt and adapt to the current challenges of COVID-19. Otherwise, Parliament will be irrelevant. And I agree, we have not done enough. Parliament should scrutinize all the policies and responses on COVID. Parliament should ensure that the funds, the billions that are being spent on COVID or being diverted to COVID are spent transparently. No corruption in the content to various groups or masks, face masks, and sanitizers. The distribution is fair and inclusive. But in that law enforcement grounds, to still respect the rule of law. Time to say, but there's no law. The law should remain a guiding principle. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I can see that Charles is now here. So Charles, can you go next? And then Masero. So Charles, go ahead.
Thank you so very much. To look at the question that was raised regarding the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is basically planned to start trading under the AfCFTA regime by July 1st, 2020. Of course, this may be a challenge, but if we could get other ways of trading, like online trading, where traders can order things online, pay online, this may help us to maintain the momentum of Agenda 2063 and we move forward. Of course, it is a challenge, but we can look for other ways of trading other than physically appearing in our trade areas. But before I end, Chair Don, I would like to seize this opportunity to talk to the members of Parliament. I'll talk on behalf of our department, which is basically dealing with African Union Agenda 2063. We have realized that the African Union Agenda 2063, which has been signed to by all the African states, is not very popular in our member states. And so I'm calling upon our members of Parliament to give it a chance, to give African Agenda 2063 a chance to thrive in their countries. Because when we move around, what we hear of are the sustainable development, our African Union agenda. So I'm calling upon the members of Parliament, the Pan-African Parliament, to at least put their countries to accountability, to account for what they signed for in the name of Agenda 2063. I have moved to some countries in the continent, and I have seen committees on Agenda 2063, but very few of them. And yet, in many of our parliaments, you'll find committees on sustainable development goals. I call upon you, honorable members of Parliament, to incorporate Agenda 2063 on your committees so that countries can be accountable. Thank you so very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. And on to you, Masero.
Thank you, Don. And in 1 minute, really what I want to say is, just judging by the robustness of this conversation, it is an overdue dialogue between Parliament and civil society. And I would just like to say that in the period that is coming, as we're beginning to envision a post-COVID society and what that looks like, and the Africa we want, the role of civil society is fundamental and remains crucial. And by civil society here, I would also like to say that citizens have a fundamental responsibility to shape an alternative discourse on a developmental agenda. And that discourse comes with unleashing the power of ideas that reside with many of us and with many civil society activists because of the lived realities that we interact with on a daily basis. And I'd really like to end up here by saying thank you for having me, and I look forward to many more interactions between Parliament and civil society going forward.
Thank you very much, Masego. And finally to you, Colette.
Thank you very much. I also got the same sentiment with you, Masego. I think it has been such an inspiring process, and we wish to continue having this kind of dialogue. I was very much inspired by the commitment by honorable members of Parliament, for example, to play this monitoring role that we've been talking about with regard to guarding against corruption of state resources. Like they spoke about the IMF and World Bank funds. We also were informed in our country that there's 500 billion which was going towards as a stimulus for the low income. No, I've got no clue how that money was distributed. So we need that kind of transparency. So Parliament must really work on this. And they spoke as well that we need to be united. Civil society must end to work in silos. Divided we fall, united we stand. So there's so much that civil society, there are so many gaps. Look at where we are in terms of advocacy in Pan-African Parliament. There are so many structures in there that have not been tapped. So let us unite and then fight for the continent and fight for the unity and the solidarity. We should not allow the divisions that the member states are trying to encourage, because they are failing to deliver economic and social rights. So migrants, refugees becoming victims of circumstances. Regarding the research, I think perhaps they might pass a resolution in terms of deciding to do this holistic research on one law that will be applicable on COVID. Because remember when the lockdown started, it was applied by different laws and different means. Others are using the Constitution. They went to Parliament, they declare a state of emergency. Others list a law. So we don't know what was the purpose, for doing that. What were the objectives? Were they bypassing something? Because if they had gone through the constitutional process, we know that Parliament would have been engaged, and then the voices from the ground, people would have engaged on that. So I'm very encouraged that we had this interaction, and Parliament is really want to take this matter up with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colette. And I'll be calling up Madam Lynn Kiwandamira, who's our mistress of ceremonies for the day, to come up next so that I can be retired peacefully and leadership handed over to the next session chair. I would just like to thank all the participants very much for their patience and for the very proactive approach that they've had using the chat, even using WhatsApp and so on, those who are on social media. We have averaged 95 to 100 participants throughout the morning session, which I think is a very good number. At one point in time, I think we had reached 105 or 107. So the citizens have requested, and the MPs have accepted, that they will be more proactive in their representation roles and their oversight roles with regard to COVID, in engaging the citizenry and responding to the 9 points given to us by Masego. I also liked the suggestion, and I'm sure the MPs at PAP will think about it, whether PAP can work on a model law on COVID. If we combine that suggestion with the idea that I gave earlier that citizens can volunteer in a legal hackathon and help come up with the first draft very quickly, we might get somewhere. I think the pending questions which the MPs can carry into the next session is one, what do we do about scientific research? How do we ensure that our national governments are putting enough money into our scientific research institutions at the national level, and that they are coordinating and aggregating the research they're doing under the umbrella of the Africa CDC, the Africa Centers for Disease Control? So those are pending questions, but we still have a bit of the day with that. Thank you very much, Madam Lane, for your patience, and I now hand over back to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, my brother, and thank you to all the panelists. We really have enjoyed this session. From what I could hear from the contribution, the message that I'm getting is that it's time to press the reset button to reconnect parliaments and citizens. We are very grateful that civil society organizations are seeing the need to partner with the Pan-African Parliament. We should have done this a long time ago. There is no reason why civil society should not be at the Pan-African Parliament. The Pan-African Parliament was established for you, so we expect to see more interactions with you at the Pan-African Parliament. I was just imagining that, imagine if our civil society was proactive, the way it is so proactively always want to, raise issues about government. Imagine if we were proactive in the development sector in terms of ensuring that for this COVID, we mobilize our citizens. Imagine if each citizen was to pay $1 towards the fight against COVID. The reason why we have survived COVID as a continent is because of our people. It's because of the resilience of our people. Now imagine if we were to collect $1, not more than $1, from every citizen of the African continent. It would ensure that they would be part of the solution. It would ensure that they are aware of the issues which are related to COVID. It would ensure that they would be wanting to be coming to the fore with the solutions that we are looking for. I mean, the Madagascan solution is an African solution, which we should applaud, and we should put more money, more resources into that medicinal plant which they have. So my take out of this thing, and I'm hoping that civil society as well will rally with the parliaments throughout Africa to mobilize the citizens to pay this $1 into a special fund which goes towards the research that we are talking about and which goes towards supporting those in need. Only then do we become relevant and legitimate in the eyes of our people. Otherwise, we remain upstream civil society organizations. Otherwise, we remain upstream parliamentary officials. So I think it's time to act. It's time to reconnect, and it's time to reset the linkage button with our citizens. Having said so, I would like to thank my brother Donald Daya for the way he chaired and facilitated this meeting. He brought out many thematic issues, which we as a Pan-African Parliament are going to take forward into our session, into our committees, and we can assure you that the outcome of this meeting will end at the table of heads of states at their next summit. Allow me now to introduce Honorable Abubakar Siddiqui Kone, who is the chairperson of the Pan-African Parliament on the Committee of International Relations, Peace and Security. A very successful meeting at the Pan-African Parliament, where he was interrogating together with his committee and together with other members of civil society, the issue of silencing the guns. Are we only silencing the hardware? Are we silencing the issues which cause the guns to make a lot of noise? And to facilitate the next session on silencing the guns is Honorable Abubakar Siddiqui Kone. I now call upon you, Honorable Abubakar Siddiqui Kone, to take the floor and to facilitate this session on silencing the guns. This session, the two resource people will be Dr. Admo Kambudzi, who has been replaced by Mr. Robert Letsatsi. I think I saw his name, and also Ms. Idiati Hassani. Over to you, Honorable Abubakar Siddiqui Kone. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me properly. I would like to greet the members of the Bureau of the Pan-African Parliament and the PAP management and thank them for organizing this very fruitful discussion on the theme of the African Union, silencing the guns. And this theme is now combined with the COVID-19 pandemic. But I would like to welcome all of us to this meeting. And this is one of the many sessions that we've had at the Pan-African Parliament on this theme. And the African Union has chosen this theme in order to stop the interstate wars, conflicts between communities, conflicts between various groups. Are you hearing me? Okay. So to stop post-electoral conflict, etc. So in order to do this, we need to strengthen the state of law, the rule of law, and strengthen the governments in general. And I would like to recognize with you that this pandemic has surprised the whole world. We've lost connection. And so the pandemic has put us in a situation where we have a lack of equipment, a lack of preparedness, and all of our governments have had to take very important decisions. But governments need support measures, and they need support groups, the parliaments, the NGOs, civil society, and all of this to support our populations and our various institutions across Africa. And I would like to congratulate Madagascar, who has shown that when we have a strong African parliament, we can find solutions for the world and not just for our individual countries. And so today we're going to have this discussion. We've lost connection again. We've lost the speaker. So I would like to share with you the experiences in Côte d'Ivoire. We've taken various decisions, not only on in the medical sector, where we have injected 15 billion to strengthen the medical institutions for tests, to buy masks, gel, and other protective equipment. And on a social level, the government has contributed 7 billion for social measures. And the government has continued to work. We had a very important work group or a working session with the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Solidarity to ensure that these funds were made available. And we have distributed food and necessary items to the most vulnerable populations in our country, but there have been challenges. And we have had to rely quite a lot on NGOs for assistance in reaching the most vulnerable populations. And this has strengthened our efforts. And we have also tried to give financial aid to the most vulnerable families. We have given some assistance in terms of delays for paying taxes, lowering taxes, and other financial measures. So that is the situation in our country, and I would like to thank the various panelists for participating in this discussion. And it is a discussion on silencing the guns, but now in the context of COVID-19. And this has posed a challenge in particular in terms of holding elections. We have had elections that have been postponed, some elections that have taken place but without observers. We have had places of worship close where people have not been able to go to places of worship. So much has been affected by the COVID-19 situation. I would now like to open the floor to our panelists. Who would like to take the floor first? Can you hear me, panelists? Who would like to take the floor first? Madame Elodie, we see you. Lynn, can you see who would like to take the floor first? Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm asking for the floor, please.
Yes, Madam Adiati, she should be the one to take. Miss Idiati Hassan. She is making a presentation on behalf of CDD Abuja, Nigeria. The representative of Mr. Kambudzi hasn't been able to connect, so we are still hoping that he will be able to connect. So we'll call Miss Idiati Hassan from the Director of the Center for Democracy and Development, CDD, Nigeria.
Sorry, Madam Idiat, please. You need to select interpretation and choose a language. We cannot hear you. Select the globe, then select language.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, good afternoon, parliamentarians and colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a positive that we can all stay for close to 4 hours talking about our continent. We have actually had a very enriched discussion, so I will not go back on what has actually been said, but just try to recap and place priorities on things that we really have to do in terms of moving forward, especially as it regards to silencing the gun as a continent and countries. The COVID-19 pandemic do have a lot of implications for us, immense implication on the African peace and security architecture, and importantly, our ability to actually silence the gun. Today, we have had a lot of issues raised as challenge: the inequality, education itself, socio-economic condition, food security are some of the issues that have been raised since we started this conversation as a fallout of the pandemic presently. And we know that in months to come, in days to come, most of these already identified challenges will continue to become very, very aggravated, really. And when we look at where we are also as a continent and in most of our countries, and the kind of conflicts that we are facing, which are largely internal, what are the reasons from some of these for some of these conflicts? Poverty, inequality, hunger, historical grievances, arms proliferation, climate change, which is leading to lots of contestation over economic resources, land and water in most of these countries. So this is why we are in the situation we are, with different forms of conflict ongoing in our country. And this is what we are again facing as a fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic. So it puts us in a place where we really have to rethink, and we really have to look at what we are going to do and to match our present realities, which has not changed, which may be positive, especially if we start looking at maybe Madagascar, which has been presented on several occasions since we started this. So there are hopes, but in spite of the hopes that we can talk about, there are also a lot of challenges that we have to deal with, really. Now, this pandemic presents us 4 different pictures, which I have actually captured, what I call the big picture. One is the opportunity for political exploitation of the conflict, which is already happening in several of our countries. The political exploitation, of course, has got to do with the introduction of emergency laws, some which are not pro-people, some which are very unfriendly in terms of the legislations, and some which has, of course, give broad and expansive power to governments, really. There is also the postponement of elections in some countries, or the quality of elections where they have agreed that elections should also go on. That we've seen climb down on protests and human rights. In fact, before the pandemic took head, we had the case of Niger, where people had previously planned protests before the emergency law prohibiting 1,000 people from congregating. Where like 15 of our colleagues were claimed in prison, 3 people died. That is just at the beginning. Now, across all countries, from Nigeria to Kenya, several countries, we see human rights violations ongoing as a result of this pandemic, attempts to actually address the pandemic, access to information in a continent where trust is key and is actually a plus. So the political exploitation of the conflict is a very, very big key trend that we really have to look at again. Then I think what worries me is the breakdown in terms of social order also from this pandemic itself. So we have said there are unemployment is expected to rise. Here in Nigeria, people are not paying salaries, or they are reducing salaries. They are sending off workers. Of course, there are lots of issues that is causing all these social economic challenges. And it has a threat when you look at social order. It's in the country. It has a threat for us, and it is a threat that we really have to talk in terms of how do we actually address the implication of a breakdown of law and order as it arises from this pandemic. Now, in terms of all the conflicts that are presently ongoing, there is also a kind of stoppage in the mediation in all this conflict itself. There is a breakdown in terms of ongoing conflict mediation efforts, both formal and informal. So the ones we are doing as civil society, as our local structures, we have to pause it because of the pandemic and the need for social distancing. But what about the ones that are actually being facilitated in different, by the African Union itself, by other partners, by countries? There are travel restriction, inability to meet, breakdown of law and order, and the fact that priority itself has got to change. We are focusing more on health. We are focusing more on how do we get out of this pandemic itself. This itself is affecting our conflict mediation efforts. And fourthly, I think the fourth one, when you take away the risks to social order, the breakdown in terms of ongoing conflict and the exploitation of the pandemic itself politically, is also, I think that's the opportunity really for us. The opportunity in terms of the fact that it gives us an opportunity to see if we can address the power vacuum. We can change power. Maybe there can be a positive in terms of how we outsource power on the continent to other actors. We see what is happening in Libya, Nigeria. We see even our negotiation power, how we can then make our own power to become homegrown. The positives in kind of what we are seeing in Senegal, in terms of Madagascar, how are we able to positively explore this? And how are we able to organize as a continent in terms of addressing this challenge itself from a continental perspective, from a country perspective in itself? So these are there. But there are a lot that we really have to do. We are doing a lot as civil society, like we have heard, but I think there is still a lot on the table that we really have to do. And importantly, what we really have to do again will have to be that how do we address the reversal of democracy, the possibility, or it's actually a reality in terms of the reversal of democracy. How do we go ahead to address authoritarianism? Like, how do we address it? By this, we are talking in terms of the human rights violations which are presently ongoing on the continent. How do we put gender on the table? That's one thing that has been missing largely in all the conversation we are having today. The issue of gender, the issue of young persons, the issue of persons living with disability in our work. If we are postponing elections, which might be good, how do we negotiate? And if we are going ahead with having elections, what kind of legislative framework, what kind of conversation are we having? How inclusive are all these conversations? But more and more, both the legislature, which is our parliament, the parliament, and the civil society will have to work assiduously to address the reversal of democracy and pushing back authoritarianism at this point in time itself. Secondly, is also to talk in terms of a local conflict mechanism that can be ongoing in the same way we are addressing the pandemic. This becomes real because this pandemic itself is already shaping up more conflicts to be ongoing. So if I give Nigeria as an example, most of the conflicts we have are internal. They are either ethnic-based, they are either based on the north, the south divide, which is more or bifurcation on religious basis. The sharing of palliatives itself is already bringing this up because people are feeling more and more excluded. Our work when it comes to addressing the violent extremists, Boko Haram, or herders and farmers conflicts are like completely disappeared. I'm sure it's the same in Mali, it's the same in Niger, and most places where we work, where we really have to post this as non-state actors. And the same is also happening for the state actors. So we have to start thinking of a conflict prevention framework, a conflict management framework within the work that we are doing in terms of addressing the pandemic as non-state actors. And of course, the parliament has got a role to play in this from the government angle in terms of legislation itself. Now, aside from our work on promoting accountability and justice as civil society actors, there are a lot we can do. Yes, we are provisioning, we are doing transparency, we are looking at the issue of transparency and accountability, but there is still a lot of vacuum that the civil society will have to build in terms of building trust, which will make people to actually adhere to most of the COVID response mechanism at this stage. And by civil society, we have to think of a more broad, expansive definition of civil society, to think of citizens, to think of the traditional sector and the religious institution who have the trust of the people and the people in terms of addressing or us coming up with a whole of society approach. And the production of knowledge is key. I'm very happy it's been mentioned. but we have to produce knowledge, and local knowledge to address present realities itself. Then while talking about all this, we need a new funding mechanism to talk about. We have to look at a new funding mechanism which will be able to address all our challenges from a local prison, locally driven, and of course, one that we can also think in terms of not just effectiveness and efficiency, but sufficiency and sustainability of this mechanism. I think that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam, for your very important comments. I call
Thank you, Madam Idriata-san. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. Okay, I would like to thank our first speaker, Madam Idriata-san, for a very good presentation. She really highlighted the impact of COVID-19 on the objectives of the African Union for this year, especially the theme, silencing the guns. And because of confinement and the lockdowns and social distancing, it has been very difficult to have discussions with the different stakeholders to apply the policies for the controlling and reduction of arms. She raised a number of very important points, and I would like to thank her. And please give the floor now to the next speaker, Dr. Urundi. Sorry, Dr. Murungi, excuse us.
Yes. Dr. Murungi, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Good afternoon, colleagues. Honorable Chair, thank you very much for this opportunity. Also want to say my regards to all the honorable members of the Pan-African Parliament from wherever they are joining. I think I will be very specific to the issue that I was asked to reflect on, which is on civil society and the Silencing the Guns campaign. And so my reflections are going to be a bit brief. I'm also conscious of the fact that we are quite behind time. So pardon me if I go quite quickly. I think it's a bit of a pity that we are reflecting on this campaign at this point, 7 years after the launch of the campaign, and we are still talking about silencing the guns and recognizing that we have actually not achieved much. We have not achieved all the goals that we would have wanted in relation to reducing violent conflict on the African continent. But besides that, also reflecting on the fact that we are now talking about silencing the guns in the context of an ongoing pandemic, which is also another form of crisis. So the manner in which we are reflecting on these issues is it's influenced by this background and context. And I think, particularly speaking from a civil society perspective, these issues really shape how we see our role or how we ought to see the relationship between civil society and government mechanisms, including the Pan-African Parliament, but also more the broader institutions within the African Union framework. So I think then this year, particularly 2020, and taking on board the fact that the AU considers this theme essential for this year, even before we knew about the COVID issues, I think this year should give us an opportunity to really reflect on the effectiveness of the mechanisms that have been adopted to address violent conflict on the continent, but also more especially to look forward on how we can change that narrative of Africa as the continent where we have ongoing conflict, where we have disagreements that cannot be resolved in diplomatic means. So I think this session is therefore, I will approach it from a reflection point of view as opposed to a prescriptive point of view. And I think in light of the little time that we have, I'll be very selective on issues that I think we can pick up and maybe discuss when we have the open plenary. If we look back to 2013 and up to now, a lot of progress has been made in addressing conflict. And I think the partnerships that have existed between intergovernmental organizations and the African Union, non-governmental organizations, have played a huge part to that. So, for instance, we have agreements now. We have agreements in South Sudan. We have agreements in Central African Republic. We have agreements in Sudan, and even within internal conflicts, we have various mechanisms that are starting to pick up. But we are still confronted with a situation where we still have guns going, and it's still volatile, and we are not too sure what to expect in the next maybe few months, few years in the longer term. I had initially thought of putting this discussion within the context of the AU's roadmap to silencing the guns, because the AU has already, as of 2017, thought about certain steps, issues that we need to respond to make it possible to respond to this particular concern. But because we don't have so much time, I'm going to speak to just highlight what I think are 4 areas that civil society organizations can work with or have been working in, and which we can reflect on their role in this regard in relation to contributing to silencing the guns. So these issues have somehow been highlighted by the previous speakers in some point, in some extent or the other. One of those issues is in relation to the purpose and tailoring of the role of civil society to make it respond to the crisis of silencing the guns or the crisis of armed conflict across the continent. The second one I would want to mention is the linkages between the socioeconomic circumstances and the work that civil society does in that space and conflict and ongoing conflicts within the continent. And the third issue, if we still have time, is how we can leverage the traditional strengths of civil society organizations to respond to conflicts across the continent. So let me start with the first one in relation to how we view civil society organizations. And that ties very closely to what the previous speaker said in terms of how do we understand who is civil society organizations. And there is a tendency often to think about civil society organizations as these NGOs that regularly we deal with on a national platform, on an international platform, that are doing advocacy work, that are registered as NGOs at national level, and not considering civil society organizations as, as a space where there are many actors that are non-governmental. And so we have to think about community-based organizations, religious organizations, these advocacy-based organizations that are registered at national level as NGOs, but also think about private sector actors that would not regard themselves as civil society organizations, but whose role is still contributing to the non-governmental spaces. And I think what I'm trying to say is that when we approach the role of civil society from a very homogeneous background, then we fail to repurpose, we fail to tailor the interventions. And so, for instance, we have had more talking from civil society and more service delivery and less engagement on policy and less research and innovation, because we have not been able to view civil society organizations to include those who are engaged in research and those who are engaged in innovation, such as universities and university-based institutions. We also do not see the role of civil society organizations in not just staving off conflict, but in being involved in the conflict resolution so that you can build the resilience of communities. And that speaks about how we understand civil society organizations that work at the grassroots level, but also how we bring on board religious organizations, not necessarily politicizing them, but activating the potential of those institutions. So I think going forward, when we talk about the roadmap to reaching to the silencing of the guns, we need to really seriously consider civil society strategy as tailored to the purpose of each and every civil society body, not necessarily as a homogeneous strategy. The second thing is in terms of the relatedness of socioeconomic circumstances and the responses to silencing the guns. Traditionally, within the African continent, civil society organizations have mostly been regarded as those that are at the forefront of offering services, as well as the forefront of highlighting the deficiencies in governance and the deficiencies in issues that relate to every day-to-day living of societies. But besides that, when we come to the security sector, or when you come to addressing issues to do with peace and conflict, we kind of tend to think that is the exclusive, almost exclusive field of government machinery, of intergovernmental mechanisms, and not so much the role of civil society in defining that strategy. And I would want to just let us think that the prevention of conflict and the sustainability of solutions to conflict depend upon socioeconomic circumstances of the societies in which these people live. So it's not a disjointed agenda to therefore ask that we view the role of civil society organizations as part of the broader, particularly their role in relation to calling for human rights responses, human rights-based responses that ensure protection of socioeconomic circumstances of societies, as part of the response to silencing the guns. So I would think that the next strategy or the next few years would integrate more and more of the continuous call by civil society organizations for an improved welfare of the entire society as a response to conflict. Thirdly, and maybe the last that I will have time to speak to, is the need to leverage the traditional strengths of civil society organizations. And I think those are very much manifested in the context of addressing conflict, because civil society organizations, one, have the advantage of not being, having the controls, not having the burden, the barriers of bureaucracy. And two, the civil society organizations have the advantage of being able to adapt very quickly. So some of the traditional strengths of civil society organizations, particularly community engagement and social mobilization that you need in a country to stave off conflict. Then the question of adaptability. Civil society organizations are in a best position to pilot, but also to lead in areas of social adaptability and resilience. And it is possible to leverage those capacities from civil society organizations if it is included in the strategy that the AU is going to adopt in relation to addressing silencing the guns or pursuit of silencing the guns. So I think in coming to almost the end of my brief reflections, I think there are certain strategies that we might all want to think about. I would just ask that as we think about those, as we see the next few years of getting an Africa that is free of conflict and free of the guns, that we would need to adopt a nuanced understanding and strategy for engaging civil society organizations that is purposive and that is deliberate in, defining the role according to the various roles, according to the various nature of civil society organizations that we have. Secondly, that we should be deliberate about identifying the traditional strengths of civil society organizations and then integrating those into the strategy so that it's not the opposite. The civil society organizations are trying to fit in to what has already been defined, which is much more difficult. That if we can integrate their strengths into the strategy, it would make it much easier to engage with the overall continental agenda. And finally, to say that responding to conflict, whether as civil society organizations or whether as national governments, whether as members of the African Union, we need to keep in mind that conflict generally feeds off socioeconomic deficit. And so whatever that deficit is in our society, if we don't address it, we'll not be able to address the things that fuel and make conflict worse on our continent. So this is really just my reflections, more based on going forward than looking backward of how civil society has been able to participate in this goal. Thank you.
Is he not coming? Thank you, Dr. Marungi, for those insightful reflections. I would like to assure you that the Pan-African Parliament was established for citizens and civil societies. Most of the time, civil society complain that they are only invited into political space. We at the Pan-African Parliament, we say the Pan-African Parliament belongs to you. So come, there is a lot of work for you to be done. We will assign each one of you an institution. And I think that this year, the year of the coronavirus, is the year to rebrand civil society in terms of our developmental agendas. I liked what you said, that socioeconomic deficits lead to guns, and therefore to silence the guns, we need to silence the socio-economic deficits. I will now call upon Honorable Kone to make some comments, and then he will invite Honorable Boras to close the meeting for us. I'm sorry we will not be able to take the comments. I see their hands up already, but we invite you to the Pan-African Parliament. Since this is the theme for the year, we invite you at the next session. We'll be sending you invitations to attend so that we can answer all your questions. Honorable Kone, over to you. And then you will, I will request you to invite Honorable Boras to close this meeting for us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Dr. Nkata Murungi and Mrs. Hidayat Hassan, thank you very much for the quality of your words, and particularly the relationship that exists between COVID-19 and reaching the objectives that we need to reach. I would like, in fact, in terms of the second speaker, is that she insisted upon the definition of civil society organizations, and also insisted on the fact that we should have a definition which is more flexible and which would in fact add far more aspects. She insisted on the character and on the resilience and on the adaptability of civil society organizations. She also highlighted the advantages of public opinion for decision makers. So we need to integrate civil society in a general strategy in terms of violence, in terms of post-electoral violence and violence against minorities. And I would like, in any case, to thank you for the quality of your words. This debate, of course, continues, and until we actually reach our objectives, we cannot stop. This pandemic, for me, is just a stage in our lives. We need to have a general communication from Africa. We need to speak with the same voice, which reaches our populations, but which will allow Africa, in fact, to go forward in terms of societies that we need to have one single solution. I also would like to thank very much the acting chair, and also to thank Honorable General Boras, and I would like to give him the floor. And also very much sorry that others could not make their recommendations now. Yes, there we are. Thank you very much, Mr. Kone. Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear, Honorable Kone? It really was a great pleasure to see you. And at the same time, I hope that we'll be able to see one another very soon after, of course, being able to deal with COVID-19. And I would like to thank you all. I'd like to thank you all for having spoken, because it was really excellent, Mr. Kone, Honorable Kone. I would like to thank you, particularly because you have your committee plays a very, very important role in the Pan-African Parliament. You work extremely hard. You actually travel and you come. So Chief Sharumbira, also, I would like to thank him very much. Also, Honorable Lynn, and in fact, all the honorables Because in terms of coronavirus, of course, you are right. It is dangerous. It is a very dangerous epidemic for our African countries. And we would like to ask all our brothers and sisters and all the representatives of the Pan-African Parliament to do more, to mobilize more, to be able to support our African people. I would like to ask those in our countries to try, in fact, to put at our disposal more means to be able to respond to this epidemic. But today is a very, very extraordinary day. It's a very special day because this is a day that represents Africa. It is an African Union Day. It is Africa Day, very important for the African Parliament. As this, of course, it will very soon be our anniversary, also very soon. And we need absolutely to invite all the honorables and all the representatives of all African countries that are members to be able, and we ask them to be able to in fact, to ask the African Union to impose, in fact, a leadership on our countries and to be able to contribute more so we can, in fact, put an end to the crisis and to the conflicts that we see on our continent. Because today there is also the issue, and that is on the Agenda 2063, this issue that all problems of our African countries, and that is, of course, in terms of silencing the guns and the fundamental principle of our continent, which is the right of self-determination, where conflicts are concerned, that countries should be able to determine also subscribe also to international law. Today we talk about problems in Africa, but in terms of representatives of African people, we need to assume our own responsibilities. Honorable Kone, you are the chair of the Committee on Conflicts, and I think that it is absolutely imperative that the problems of my brothers and sisters from the Western Sahara, that today, that if we want to build a strong actor, a strong economy, strong education, health, if we want an Africa which has food security, we need that absolutely that all these issues to do with conflict, in fact, be solved. And we would like the African Union, we ask the African Union to give, in fact, to act more towards the end of these conflicts, and at the same time, to be able to silence the guns. We need also for the Pan-African Parliament, which represents the African people, that they play a very important role in the future. Because, as you know, the coronavirus 19, there are many, many issues. There were lots of things that were lacking. Even all over the world, there were many things lacking. And that is why today, how do we say that today we will try to use the Pan-African Parliament to advance, and with the representatives of the people, to very much help with this issue of COVID-19. And I would like to thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Chief Charumbira, Honorable Lip, and all the representatives that were here today and who were here in the name of the African Day. I wish you lots of strength. I wish you lots of health for your families and for yourselves. And the day today, it's a very special day for the African people, and I would like to thank you all. And I declare this session closed. I thank very much Honorable Kone and all the representatives and all those that were here in the name of the African Union. Thank you very much to all the African people, and thank you very much to all the representatives, to all the members of Parliament of African parliaments. Thank you, Honorable Kone. And thank you very much, also Acting Clerk, Mr. Galim, Madam Lynn, and all the personnel, all the staff of the Pan-African Parliament, who were able to, in fact, really create this wonderful day today, to be able to organize it, to be able to let us hear the voice of the Pan-African Parliament discuss the issues of COVID-19, the issues of Africa, and I declare the session closed. Thank you very much, Honorable Kane. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much for your wise words. I would now like to give the floor to Madam Lynn. Thank you very much. Thank you.
The acting president, His Excellency Honorable Boras, Vice President Chief Charumbira, the acting clerk, members of the Pan-African Parliament, members of the civil society, members of the Pan-African Parliament staff, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our proceedings.
Sorry, there was a technical problem with Madam Lynn. Madam Lynn, please select English so that you can hear you.
I've selected. I wish to advise all our participants that these proceedings were recorded. We will share the recording with you, and these proceedings were streamed. We will also share the link with you. But thank you very much for your participation, and may you have a blessed Africa Day. Thank you. I can't leave until